and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about the mental change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks. I'm thrilled you can join us today. Today, we are going to be talking about a novel at-home disease-modifying therapy for Alzheimer's disease. And we're also going to talk about the HOPE study, which I'm very excited to learn more about. But prior to introducing our guests, I always like to do a couple of shout outs. So one, I want to let you know on October 10th, which will be here before we know it, I'll be out at Artist Senior Living in Woodbury, Minnesota, doing a program on Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care. And you can RSVP to that. It'll be an evening program from 5 to 6 to Jana McCoy at 651-943-2840. And then also September 28th and 29th, I will be part of the Geriatric Care Summit for 2023. You can just Google Geriatric Care Summit. I'll actually be doing the keynote on the 28th, and that'll be from 9 to 10. And the topic is calibrating care to retain and secure staff and families. So I hope you can join us on both of those. And then, of course, you can always go to alzheimerspeaks.com, go to our free educational resource tab. You can also go to our public events. Both are listed there for more details as well. And you can also find your way to dementiamap.com, which is our global resource directory, and also another program that I'm doing with Lance Slayton of All's Home Cares Matters called Conscious Caregiving with L&L, and that's only a monthly episode, but we do hot topics and we dive deep with a panel, and they're about 2-hour discussion. Very, very interesting. Our last one on end of life has over 275,000 views already, and it's just been a week. So you can check out any of those from our site at alzheimerspeaks.com. Let's go ahead and introduce you to our guest today. Well, I am so excited to introduce our guest today. We have Dr. Ralph Kern with us. And Ralph, I'm going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Great, Lori. Thanks. Great to be here. I'll be very brief. I'm a neurologist. I spent the first half of my career as an academic neurologist leading a university department. Then I went into biotechnology industry, and for the last 17 years, I have been developing treatments for different types of brain diseases, including Alzheimer's. And I am the chief medical officer at Cognito Therapeutics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I've been with the company now for over half a year. And we are doing very interesting work and hoping to help people with Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases.
Fantastic. You know, I always ask every single one of my guests if they've been personally touched by dementia in their own family or circle of friends. So if you give us some insight, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. My late mother suffered from Parkinson's disease, and she got it a little bit later in life. But, I think that's a condition that has an effect on cognitive function. I've had other family members with Alzheimer's disease I've seen firsthand. And then, of course, practicing neurology for many, many years, I had firsthand experience of how relentlessly progressive the disease is and how it affects patients and their families. So, yeah, I think I've seen the challenge that we're facing.
Yeah, it's interesting. My mom lived with dementia for 30 years. The first 10, it was kind of poo-pooed by her general GP as hormones. But by the time, her journey was over and we had her autopsy, they said Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Lewy body. And the neurologist said he had never seen a brain that small, with that much shrinkage. But he said that's what we should expect. But it is a difficult disease to pin down and really get some answers to.
Yeah, I'll twig on a couple things you said. So first of all, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but I think, we all have that personal experience. A couple of things that are, emerging when I was learning neurology and teaching it. We thought Alzheimer's was a very simple and single disorder. In fact, it's much more complicated, and many people have more than just the Alzheimer's changes in the brain. And I think you're giving a really good example of that. The other is that one of the most constant features of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases is as the disease advances and affects the components of the brain, in other words, the nerve cells, the wires in the brain that connect the different parts of the brain and the lining around those wires called myelin, we see the brain shrink. And I think that you're describing exactly the phenomenon that we think is really important. And that is not only does the disease advance in terms of function, in other words, can people do the things that are important to them and their families and their day-to-day lives, and so-called activities of daily living and cognition, how people think and function in terms of how they are able to speak and reason. But also, there's a very consistent effect in the brain on the loss of brain volume, so-called atrophy. And at Cognito, we're trying to address both of those problems. And as I'll tell you soon, some of our data suggests that we can really target both of those, and we can see consistent effects in both the function, how somebody does, and how they feel, but also the more objective aspects of brain shrinkage and what can one do about that. So I think those are two really important areas. I'm glad you've brought them up, because you're giving me ideas on what we can talk about today.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the neurologist, like I said, saw her brain, he kind of almost squealed, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He's like, "I shouldn't have done that." And then he said, "But this is what we should expect." I mean, he was just absolutely stunned at it. And there are so many people out there that are living with the disease so long. And I know many doctors out there are still telling people 5 to 7 years, but I am seeing a lot of people still functioning on the computer, participating in Zoom events that have been dealing with it 15 and 20 years. And I think we're going to see more of that as people get diagnosed earlier, along the route here. And it's a very different disease, I think, than what was projected when my mom, first got her diagnosis, and everyone just believed it was end stages only, and that's not the case at
Yeah.
all.
So one thing we're learning in our research studies is that early treatment makes a difference. And it doesn't just make a difference because it gets the treatment to the person who needs it sooner. I think early treatment may be more effective. And I think we need more rounds of evidence around that, but it does seem to be the case as a general rule. And of course, it needs to be established for every treatment individually, separately. The other is that, one objective of Alzheimer treatments is to stabilize function and stabilize the loss of brain volume, so to slow down the rate of brain atrophy. And if there are treatments that can successfully accomplish both of those, I think those would be big advances in the Alzheimer's field. And that's what we're trying to do, in fact, with our program.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to learn more. I will hop in and say one of my big beliefs in terms of watching my mom and then working with so many people living with the disease since I stepped into this industry. And anyone will have a hard time convincing me otherwise, even though I have no research behind it. But the impact of social engagement, I think, is so massively huge, where people feel it's okay to participate and they're encouraged to participate. And one of the things I hear over and over and over and over again from them is they never felt this kind of purpose in their life prior to the disease, and they feel they're helping others, and they feel like it kind of stays off their symptoms for that period of time when they're active and helping. And not that they won't collapse after they've done a conference and work so hard at getting up on stage to be present and be able to be understood. That can kind of wipe them out for a few days, but they said it just is, it's so prevalent in the people that I talk with. And that story hasn't changed. And it's just amazed me time and time again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're touching on a really important theme, which a couple of themes. I mean, obviously the social interaction has profound effects on how our brains function and our brain health. We don't even begin to understand the impact of social interaction on a biological level, but it's pretty clear that it has a profound effect. But the flip side of that is, and I'm just going to touch on something that you just mentioned, which is the idea that people can do something for themselves is really profound, both in terms of how they live every day and activities, but and in a minute we'll talk about our technology. Our treatment is one that's a medical device that people use themselves, and the idea of doing something for yourself with a medical device, in other words, administering and being part of the treatment of yourself, is a departure from being given something and just taking it. And I think that may have a very motivating effect on Alzheimer's in particular, but may have some therapeutic benefit in and of itself, of the idea of self-help, self-efficacy, being in control of one's health. I think are really important concepts, and are maybe a derivative of what we're trying to do at Cognito.
Well, and I think on top of doing it for yourself, it takes away that sense of being a burden to someone else, because they stress about that stuff, that everything falls onto the care partner. And so that's another thing that I hear from people all the time. When my stress is down, my symptoms are down. And so I've always found that very interesting in and of itself too. Well, let's talk about, what your company does as a whole.
Great. So we're developing a non-invasive, home-based medical device technology, and that's a mouthful, and for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So people use a device for an hour a day. They usually do it in the morning, and we've administered over 40,000 treatment sessions so far across many clinical studies. And people accommodate their daily routine to carve out the hour that they need for their treatment. And they usually sit in a comfortable chair in their living room, usually in the morning. And we do involve the care partner as well, to almost as a coach, to remind the patient that it's time to have their treatment, and keep an eye on them. And we also ask, in our clinical trials, we ask the care partner to make observations about how someone is functioning, and those observations are very, very insightful. So that's our basic technology. It delivers light and sound stimulus, and this is a sensory stimulation, and the sensory stimulation induces a predictable electrical response in the brain. And we confirm that electrical response with a test called an electroencephalogram. There's an abbreviation called EEG for that. And so we confirm that these electrical oscillations occur, and the electrical oscillations occur time-locked with the visual and auditory stimulus. So in other words, it's like a conductor in an orchestra, so to speak. And as we confirm this EEG response in each person who uses the device, we confirmed an important concept in treatment, which is called proof of target engagement. So we prove that each person will have the required electrical response in their brain, and we do that at the onset of treatment. And if someone doesn't have the electrical response, they're not eligible for our treatment. That's a very small minority, but we don't want people who can't benefit from the treatment to use it. Also, when we do that first test with the EEG, we ask people if they're having any adverse events, and sometimes people spontaneously report adverse events. And we don't want someone to use the treatment if they don't tolerate it. And again, it's a very small proportion of those who try the treatment who can't tolerate it. But again, it's better to know that up front than to start and then have to stop later. We track the use of the device over time because the device is connected to the cell towers. So we can monitor the time that the treatment is started and the time that the treatment is stopped. And we want people to use it for an hour a day. You can't use it for more than that because it has an auto stop function. So it won't allow you to use it for more than 1 hour a day because that's the prescribed treatment. So you might want to ask me, how does this induced electrical activity modify Alzheimer's disease? Well, that's a fantastic question. If that's the one you want me to answer, I will answer that.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I would, and I like that it automatically turns itself off so people can't overuse it. But one question before you answer the other was, can they come back periodically during the day and say, okay, I'm going to do 20 minutes here and then I'm going to do 20 minutes after lunch? And is that possible too, even if it's not ideal?
It's not ideal. We want a 1 hour session, and we've actually looked very carefully at our previous clinical trial, and we saw that the adherence or the appropriate 1 hour per day use, approximately 1 hour per day use, it's there about 85% of the time. So people are pretty good about adhering to their treatment. The other thing is that in that first session, when people use the device for the first time, the technologist who comes and does the EEG testing adjusts some of the stimulation parameters to optimize the EEG response. So the device is optimized for each person. And there's a range of stimulus intensity that will produce that desired response, the so-called gamma oscillations. And when people get the device, they can adjust the strength of the stimulation within a preset range. So, for example, if they felt it was too strong one day, they could bring the intensity down a little bit. And sometimes people are more sensitive on some days than others to light and sound. So we allow that optimization function both at the beginning and then during the treatment. We find that once people set the device to a range of activity that is comfortable for them, they generally leave it. And most of the adjustments happen in the first few weeks. And then after that, people mostly leave the device settings alone and just go back and do their 1 hour per day standard treatment.
Does this plug in like a cell phone where they have to, charge it overnight or?
So it does need to be recharged. So there is a charging cable and there's a controller unit. There's glasses and headphones. And we're obviously working on a much sleeker design for commercial use, but this is the one that we're using in the clinical trial. So it does have to be plugged in. So the battery is quite good, but it does need electricity.
Okay. So are both of these plugged into another piece of equipment then, or?
They connect into the controller unit, which is just a handheld controller, which is similar to a TV controller, for example.
Okay. And then with the sound, what types of things are they hearing? Are they hearing people talk to them, or is it pinging sounds like they're out in the universe, or
These are
what
these
do
are
they
these
hear?
are these are just repetitive,
Mhm.
repetitive stimulation at a certain frequency. So it's you don't it's not wouldn't be someone speaking or music. It would be a repetitive, and it's almost like a tone. Yeah.
Okay. And then as far as what are they seeing a picture, or is it different types of light, or one type of light that they're looking at?
Yeah, it's light flashes. So in other words, both the sound and the visual are 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 not like someone's voice or music, for example. It wouldn't be that.
Okay. So when they have these glasses on, this is going to sound really dumb, but do they have their eyes open to see these flashes, or can they keep them closed and still get the same effect?
Good question. So the current model that we're using in the clinical trial is a closed view. In other words, they almost look like dark sunglasses, where you can't see through. But we're developing other models where there'll be open view, where people will be able to see through. But those are not the ones that we're testing right now in the clinical trial.
Okay. So when I was referring to open or closed, I was referring to, like, if I had them on, would my eyelids be open or closed? And would I get the same benefit either way?
So the eyes should be open, but it actually can get through the eyelids because light gets through our eyelids into the back of our eye. But we ask people to keep their eyes open, and to rest during the hour, in a comfortable chair. Um, and it's hard to do activities, obviously, if there is a closed lens you can't see through, and we want people to stay in a safe place for the period of treatment.
Okay. Because I just thought, well, if I'm relaxed, and I think the older I get, the more relaxed I get, I'm comfortable just going to sleep, and so I'm wondering if that's an issue with people
Well,
falling asleep.
yeah, good question. We ask people to stay awake. We don't want them to get too comfortable, and we also involve the care partner in keeping an eye on their loved one to make sure that they stay awake during the treatment session.
Okay, so they'll just poke them if they start snoring and, and bounce them back awake.
Yeah, I guess there's different methods of keeping someone awake.
Yeah, well, I find it interesting, and it's nice that they can do something like that at home. Is this how long is the treatment for, for the clinical trial that they're in?
So it's an hour a day. The current clinical trial is 12 months,
Okay.
and the final assessment is after 12 months. In the previous study that we did, there was a comparison between the treatment and a device that doesn't generate, same device, but the stimulation parameters that don't generate the electrical activity. So that was for 6 months, and then we did another 12 months where everybody was allowed to switch to the active treatment. So it can be, we have 18 months of experience now. In the current study, we'll have 12 months, and then we'll see some people may continue after with another year of treatment if they choose to.
Okay. And then would they keep the equipment, or just keep it for however long they're in the trial for and then return the equipment?
Well, yeah. So in a clinical trial, you're supposed to only use the device during the clinical trial, not beyond. Obviously, we're hoping to generate data uh, in the clinical trial that would help us with a regulatory submission to have this as an approved therapy. At that point, we'll have other discussions to see how people should continue with treatment. There may be a different version of the device at that time. So we'll have all those discussions down the road.
Okay. And is this considered bioelectrical medicine?
Great question. So this is a sensory stimulation device that generates electrical activity in the brain. So it generates a physical event in the brain, which is electrical. In a way, it's biophysical. I think that's a fair statement. But the biophysical stimulus leads to biological changes in the brain. So we know that some of the pathways that are involved in protecting brain cells, in repairing brain cells, or preserving or maintaining the lining around nerves, the so-called myelin in the brain, are very much affected by this electrical activity. And we've been able to demonstrate this in previous studies a couple of ways. One is that in one study, we took samples of the spinal fluid at baseline before the treatment started, and then after 8 weeks. And in the spinal fluid, using very special measurement techniques, we're able to show that some of the proteins that are involved in protecting neurons, in repairing the connections between neurons, the so-called synapses, and also in the proteins that are involved in making myelin in a cell called oligodendrocytes, that those have very significant changes. And we'll be describing those this year at a scientific meeting. The other way that we've shown how this biophysical treatment generates biological effects is by using MRI scans, and we use the MRI scans to measure the brain structures. So we look at the so-called gray matter and we look at the white matter in the brain. We can look at them separately, and we can look at them for the whole brain or in parts of the brain. And what we've seen is a remarkable reduction in brain atrophy, which I think at the outset of this conversation today, you mentioned how profound brain atrophy can be in Alzheimer's disease. And we've seen on the brain structure side in our phase 2 study, we've seen over 70% reduction in brain atrophy over 6 months. And we have some evidence now that continues into the beyond the study and people who continued the treatment. And the thing that's really remarkable is that that reduction in the rate of brain atrophy parallels the reduction in the rate of loss of function, so-called activities of daily living. And then we've looked at statistically the relationship between the preservation of function and preservation of structure. And we've seen some very interesting statistical relationships between them, suggesting that they move together. So this is a unique way of delivering a treatment which can be given at home, produces a biophysical response, as you describe, that translates into a biological response that is understood in terms of, neuroprotection, preservation of myelin and white matter and gray matter in the brain, and that leads to measurable changes in function and in the MRI structure. So that's why we're really excited about this. And of course, we believe that these exciting observations need to be confirmed in a large, properly conducted phase 3 trial, which is what we're doing now. And this is a huge opportunity to not only learn a lot about Alzheimer's disease, but confirm what we've seen before, and hopefully bring a new treatment to people with this condition.
Wow, that's a huge decrease in the atrophy. Unbelievable. And I love that there's that correlation between the two. This is a very different approach versus take a pill, or get an infusion. What are you seeing from people who are part of the trial? Are there any comments in terms of their feeling for this alternative approach to the disease?
Yeah, every treatment has a burden, and the burden of some of the other treatment approaches is different. So, for example, when people take pills or injections, they have to have a lot of lab testing to make sure that there's not an effect on the liver or the kidney or some other body function. We haven't seen any lab abnormalities on this treatment, so that's a burden that people don't have. There is a very specific burden in Alzheimer's disease. There's a condition called amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, or ARIA, and you may have talked about this in some of your other speakers. So we've delivered over 40,000 treatment sessions. We've not seen a single case of ARIA, or ARIA. So we believe that we can avoid that aspect of the Alzheimer treatment. And the other thing is that receiving treatment at home adds a different dimension. There are many caregivers with Alzheimer's disease who have a hard time bringing their loved ones to the hospital, because it's really not that simple to go for a hospital appointment. The waiting time is quite long. There's a lot of time. There's travel time. Generally speaking, people have to take a day off to do it. It's not part of a day. It's usually most of the day. And so we think that a home-based treatment is very important. The other aspect that we've tried to incorporate in our clinical trial, which is now enrolling people with Alzheimer's disease with our treatment, is to try to minimize the number of clinic visits. So we do a lot of the assessments at home. Obviously, the treatment is administered at home. Because there's less laboratory test monitoring, there's less visits to the hospital to have a blood test or a follow-up MRI scan to look for something like ARIA. So we're trying to minimize the burden and make this as holistic a treatment as possible, while at the same time having the same rigor of a biologic treatment in terms of the study measures are the same as the large drug trials. The imaging intensity and the way we measure the MRI scans is exactly the same. And the way we select people for the trial is also as rigorous. So we require that we confirm Alzheimer's disease. So we use a blood test in lieu of a PET scan. If someone has a positive PET scan, then that's fine. But if they haven't had a PET scan, they can have a blood test. It's something called p-tau 181, and it has a very strong prediction of Alzheimer's pathology. So in other words, it can predict who has amyloid and who doesn't. So we use that to try to limit the burden on patients. So our study does not require a PET scan. If someone has it, we'll use that information, but it doesn't require it. The treatment burden is much less. It does require a commitment of 1 hour a day of quiet time. Not too quiet, but quiet enough. And then the people generally, fold it into their routine. What's exciting, what also is different is that I mentioned earlier that we've seen these concordant or parallel changes in structure and function. We think that looking at both how somebody functions and how their brain performs and looks is very important. We're hoping to repeat the results of our phase II study called Overture in our phase 3 study, which we call HOPE. And I'm happy to tell you more about the study we're doing right now.
I would love to hear that. Love to hear that.
Great. So the HOPE study is a phase 3 trial. So participants who meet the inclusion criteria, which include the blood test for Alzheimer's, the p-tau181 test, are then randomly assigned to receive the active treatment or a sham treatment using the same device. So everybody does the same 1 hour treatment a day. And it's a 1-year study. We hope to, again, confirm what we've seen in the phase 2 trial. And we're currently at somewhere between 50 to 60 clinical trial sites across the United States. So there are clinical trial sites close to most people with Alzheimer's disease, but not everyone. So you can get more information about the trial from a website that we have, and I can spell it out for you if you want me to do that. It's www.hopestudy4ad.com. So that's Hope Study for FOR and then AND.com. So that's our HOPE study platform. On it, there's ways of getting more information. There's ways of seeing if one qualifies. The inclusion criteria are on the website. And we also have we have a wonderful team. So there's a way of calling in and asking questions and seeing if one meets the criteria for the trial. Not everybody does, but it's certainly worth a look. And we're actively enrolling people across the United States right now, and we'll be doing so for probably till next May or June. Then we'll close enrollment at that time. Yeah, so it's very exciting times.
One of the things I hear from people is the frustration of trying to figure out if they qualify or not. Do you have kind of like the top things, like in terms of what stage of Alzheimer's disease they would have to be in, if it's early, mid, or late, and can they have a mixed diagnosis is another one that is a common thing, or sometimes it can be if they've got heart disease or diabetes seems to knock them out as well. Can you address some of those things?
Absolutely. So we have a pretty wide range of Alzheimer's that is included in the clinical trial. We use something called the mini mental status exam, or MMSE. So the range of MMSE for this trial is from 15 through 28. So it's pretty broad compared to many other trials. So 15 to 20 is considered moderate Alzheimer's disease, and 21 to 28 is considered mild Alzheimer's disease. There is a requirement to confirm the amyloid status. So that can either be a prior test that someone had done with their doctor, or if that's not available, we do a blood test for p-tau181, which is a blood marker for amyloid status. The exclusion criteria also require that there aren't other competing neurological diseases. So things like strokes, seizures would confuse the measurements, and obviously they're not included. But there aren't many exclusionary criteria similar to some of the anti-amyloid therapies. So I think it's worth taking a look if you know of someone that has Alzheimer's disease, or if you want to be considered for inclusion in the trial. Have a look on the website. There also are screeners. So if you do want more information, someone can call you and find out if you have the right criteria for the trial. And it does require a caregiver. So you need a care partner, someone who will, be there to make sure that the treatment's being used properly. And also we do ask the care partner's assessment of how someone's doing. And as you know, when you look after somebody with Alzheimer's disease, you may see things about the person with the condition that they don't see. So I think that, doing cognitive testing on the person with Alzheimer's disease and having the care partner describe their function are two really important aspects of the disease. And that is the way most Alzheimer trials are being done now. It's definitely a requirement by the regulatory agencies that both cognition and function are both relevant and important aspects of the disease that need to be assessed to really get a full picture of how someone's doing.
Okay. And is there any cost? I know with some trials, everything is picked up through the trial. Others I've heard, well, you'll pay this through your insurance for different testing and stuff. How does that work?
No, we cover the trial costs. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Well, this sounds really exciting. We'll have to have you back when you guys are all said and done with this and hear what the results are. I love seeing the different approaches to this and seeing, more and more people are referring to dementia being almost cancer-like with all these subsets of diseases underneath it. And they all take their own little twists and turns and treatment protocols, with that. And I find that very exciting that it's not all just under one umbrella, which it's been for quite a while, in my opinion, as a non-professional.
That's it's a very valid statement that you're making. And, we think that the tide is rising for Alzheimer's right now, that there have been some really remarkable successes. Some of our colleagues at companies that are developing anti-amyloid therapies have really advanced the field and created hope in people with Alzheimer's disease and their families that this is not an irretrievable situation, that there are treatment options, that it's really a question of having the courage to test those treatment options. We are incredibly thankful to the patients with Alzheimer's disease and their families who agree to participate in this clinical trial. They're really the driving force for our advancement in this condition. And without people participating in the clinical trials, we would never learn about this disease. We wouldn't develop new treatments. And so the tide is rising. People are getting activated. I think a lot of the work that you're doing is really activating people. So that's wonderful. And we think the glass is half full. So that's how we're working on this. And we hope to have some good news. One thing that you should do is, as we release more analysis of our phase 2 data this year and next year, stay tuned. And, if you want us to come back and talk about our learnings, we're happy to do that and, contribute to the great cause that you're driving here.
Wonderful. Well, we'd love to have you back because we like to keep updated on what's going on. In wrapping up, I hope our listeners have found this conversation that we've had with Ralph Kern, the Chief Medical Officer. We've learned a lot. We've covered, I think, an awful lot of ground here, and especially on how you can get involved with the HOPE study as well. As Ralph said, without the people living with the disease, we're not going to find a cure. We're not going to find a treatment if we aren't able to test out different theories. So you can go to that HOPE study website, which is HOPE Study 4, and that's spelled out FOR and then AD.com. You can go to their website, which is COGNITOTX.com. And then you can find Ralph Kern on LinkedIn. So be a giver of hope. Like, click, and share. You don't know who in your sphere of influence is in need of this information. And the more information we have ahead of time, before we actually need it, the calmer we'll all be, and the better we'll be able to decipher this information. So again, to our listeners, thank you so much for being part of our community. And Ralph, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I just want to add, don't forget to check out alzheimerspeaks.com and check out all those free resources we have, as well as our children's book, Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care, and then Dementia Map. That's our global resource directory. We'll talk soon, everyone. Bye now. Hi, I'm Lori LeBay, and I wanted to tell you about Alzheimer's Speaks, which is another great podcast. You see, my own mother lived with dementia for 30 years, and I felt lost. Did you know every 3 seconds someone in the world is being diagnosed with dementia? Odds are it's going to hit your families too. We want to help you connect to services, products, tools, research, and stories so you can be prepared. Please subscribe to Alzheimer's Speaks on your favorite podcast platform.